There are moments in life when the storm hits so hard, you forget who you are and even begin to doubt who God is. But there's a story in the Bible where fear, faith, and divine power collide right. It wasn't just another miracle. It was a revelation. The disciples had just witnessed Jesus feeding 5,000 men with 5 loaves. Their minds were still trying to grasp the scale of what had happened. Yet, instead of allowing them to bask in the afterglow of a miracle, he told them to get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. He, on the other hand, went up on a mountain to pray. Now, imagine this. Seasoned fishermen, used to navigating the waters. The night gets darker, the waves get higher, and Jesus is nowhere to be seen. Have you ever felt like that? Like you obeyed God's instruction, but suddenly you're caught in a storm with no sign of his presence. That's exactly what the disciples were experiencing. They were in the middle of the sea, in the middle of the night, and in the middle of a terrifying storm. And it's in that exact moment that Jesus chooses to show up, but he comes walking on the water. At first, they don't even recognize him. Their fear clouds their vision. They think he's a ghost, and that's often what fear distorts our perception of God's presence. But then Jesus speaks, and everything changes. Take courage, it is. Don't be afraid. 3 powerful statements. He doesn't just say, don't be afraid. He precedes it with an invitation to be courageous and a revelation of identity. In Greek, this phrase echoes the divine name. Ego, I am. And then Peter, bold and impulsive. Peter says something unthinkable. If it's really you, tell me to come to you on the water. Jesus replies with one word, and Peter steps out. Let that sink in. He steps out of the safety of the boat and into the impossible. That's faith. Not blind emotion, not reckless optimism, but trust rooted in the voice of God. As Peter walks, something miraculous happens. He's defying gravity, but then he sees the wind. He becomes afraid, and he begins to sink. This is us. We believe. We take a step. We see progress. But then life hits again, and we take our eyes off Jesus. We look at the wind, and we start to drown in doubt, anxiety, and fear. But here's the beauty. Peter cries out, Lord, and immediately, Jesus reaches out his hand and catches him. Immediately. Jesus doesn't scold. He rescues. He questions Peter's doubt, but he never lets him fall beyond his reach. And that's the Jesus we follow, not one who waits for us to be perfect, but one who comes into our storm, meets us in our fear, and catches us. This moment ends not just with Peter saved, but with the entire boat worshiping. They declare, truly, you are the Son of God. Because sometimes it takes the storm to see the Savior clearly. And if you're in the middle of your own storm facing uncertainty, fear, or blocks to your blessing, there's something powerful that can help you align your spirit. We've discovered a set of sound frequencies rooted in biblical principles that are helping thousands reconnect with peace and abundance. You can try them yourself. Link is in the description below. The moment Peter and Jesus climb back into the boat, the storm doesn't rage on. Instantly, the wind dies down. The waves settle and peace returns. There's something profound in this detail. Jesus doesn't calm the storm while Peter is walking on the water. He lets him experience the chaos, the fear, the challenge, and then he calms it once Peter is back in the boat. Because sometimes God uses the storm not to test our circumstances. The lesson here is clear. The presence of a storm does not mean the absence of God. On the contrary, it often means you're on the path He set for you. Remember, Jesus sent the disciples into the boat. The storm didn't catch him off guard. It was all part of the process. In our lives, we often associate difficulty with disobedience, but this story flips that idea on its head. The disciples were precisely where Jesus told them to be. Still, they found themselves overwhelmed by the wind. It means being in the will of God doesn't always feel safe, but it will always be sacred. Because it's in those places where we discover who he really is. As the boat rocks gently and the disciples catch their breath, something shifts in their hearts. For the first time, they don't just admire Jesus. They worship him, not for the bread he multiplied or the crowds he amazed, but for the fact that he commands the wind and the waves. They saw his divinity, not just his miracles. And this is where many of us stand spiritually torn, between fear and faith. But this story invites us to do what Peter did. Walking on water wasn't the miracle. It was Peter saying, even if it makes no sense, even if it's risky, I'd rather be out there with Jesus than safe in this boat without him. And what if you did the same? What if, instead of waiting for your fears to disappear, you responded to God's call right in the middle of the waves? What if your biggest breakthrough isn't found in the stillness, but in the step? The story of Jesus walking on water is more than an inspiring tale. It teaches us that storms don't last, that doubt doesn't disqualify you, and that even if you begin to sink, the Savior's hand is never far away. So today, if you're in a season of fear or wrestling with whether to step out in faith, remember Peter? Remember that Jesus not only walks on storms, but invites you to do the same. All he needs is your trust. And maybe the storm you're facing isn't meant to drown you, because when you truly meet him in the storm, you'll never be the same again. And like those disciples, you'll fall to your knees not just in awe of the miracle, but in worship of the one who is Lord over all. Maybe the reason this story still echoes so powerfully today is because we are all, in some way, we want to believe, we want to follow, but we also sink. We get overwhelmed. We take our eyes off Jesus. And yet, this story doesn't end with Peter's failure. It ends with Jesus lifting him up. That's grace. Peter didn't have to swim back. He didn't have to prove his faith again. The moment he cried out, "Lord, save me," Jesus was already reaching out. This is the heart of the gospel. Not that we are perfect in our belief, but that we serve a Savior who rescues. And today, as you reflect on this miracle, maybe Jesus is asking you the same question he asked Peter. Why did you doubt? It's not a question of condemnation, but of invitation. Ease is inviting you to a deeper faith, to step beyond the boat, beyond your fear and into the freedom of trusting him completely. And that invitation still stands today. If you're ready to walk into a season of faith and provision, if you're believing for a breakthrough, there's a powerful resource we recommend. These sound frequencies were created to align your spirit with abundance. They're not magic, they're a tool, it used with prayer and intention. They can help shift your mindset. Find the link in the description and in the first comment below. Don't let the storm silence your faith. Let it activate it. Let your next step be a step of faith. Let your voice cry out if you're sinking. Let your worship rise, even while the waves roar. Because Jesus hasn't changed. He still walks on water. He still calls people out of the boat. And he still saves. Let that be your reminder today. The storm is not the end of the story. The hand of Jesus is always near. He walks toward you in the storm. He rescues. He restores. And he calls you deeper. So take courage. Lift your eyes from the waves and fix them on the one who never sinks. Step out of the boat and walk